I'm Jenny.
I'm Zach.
In the 1930s, billions of tons of topsoil was lost. This was because of negative farming that was done at the time. While we have improved since then, we are facing new problems that are worse than it was then. Agricultural waste includes much more than food and produce. Understanding our individual roles can help us stop this multifaceted waste.
So as some of you maybe remember, all semester I have been talking about food waste, and I have convinced these two to help me do that now. Zach is going to be discussing water, and Jenny's going to be discussing land. And what I mean by the water and land is the food waste is a lot broader than just food and produce and the money that I've been talking about. Earlier I was talking about smaller numbers, the $1 a day, the pound a day that we waste. If we extrapolate this and make it bigger, we realize that there are tons and tons of natural resources that go into food waste, the farming to produce it, the labor to produce it, the water to produce it, the land to produce it. So with these two, we're going to be discussing how our individual roles of wasting food also lead to the waste of land and specifically water. Water gets wasted through irrigation, fertilization. Zach's going to talk a lot more about that, and I'm going to hand it over to him.
All right,
now.
yeah, as Joe said, when you waste food, you're not just wasting food, you're wasting the inputs. And what do I mean by the inputs? I mean like everything from the nutrients in the soil to the water you use to the gas that was used to ship that somewhere, you know. So there's a lot of factors in waste. Water is used in almost every form of production. That's not just agricultural. That's like, they use water to make like shirts, you know. Like it's used in everywhere. So it's a pretty big, important resource. And agricultural production can account for between 70 and 90% of the state's water consumption. And it's higher in the western states the further you get towards the deserts, which makes sense. And that's significant because you're putting aside 70 to 90% of your state's water consumption for agricultural production alone. And there's a couple different parts of that. There's surface water and there's groundwater. So surface water is the water you see in lakes, rivers, and stuff you can see on the surface. It can be diverted and drawn to allow for transportation in different places. And then groundwater are the basins that are reservoirs of water that came from natural sources that are a little bit harder to move. And groundwater and surface water actually interact in some interesting ways. So it turns out when you move a lot of surface water or groundwater from a location, it affects how the water naturally goes from groundwater to surface water through the seepage through soils and stuff. So what that means is if for agricultural production you decide we're gonna divert this lake, we need a bunch of water for 45 fields, what that can mean is the groundwater then that works in conjunction with that can maybe not move how it's normally supposed to, and you can see massive environmental changes. So that can have a massive effect on the land. And water reserves are very hard to replenish. They require natural sources, and as you guys probably know, we have less ice than we used to, so water's getting a little bit harder to find. So to talk a little bit more about how land is used, I'll turn over to Jenny.
While water is heavily overused and wasted, there's also an abuse of the land that is making it so that way there's less land available for us to farm. In 2007, 2.7 billion tons of topsoil was lost per acre per year, according to the nrcs.gov website. Now this is a big deal because topsoil is extremely critical to farming for row crops. All the nutrients to make row crops comes from basically topsoil. Yes, we introduce stuff, but the main nutrients supplied comes from the topsoil. Now, whether that erosion comes from wind, from water, simply from the farmers clearing their fields every year, it is being lost. And when it is lost, it is almost impossible to replace, and it can take years and billions of dollars to get the topsoil back to where it is across hundreds of acres that have lost a lot of their topsoil. Another big problem is the overgrazing that leads to a decrease in biomass, according to the FWS.gov website. Overgrazing is simply, have you ever seen a field where it's grazed down basically to the dirt? Well, if this happens year after year after year after year, those grasses cannot come back. And if they can't come back, what do those cows eat? And so then the farmer moves on to the next field and overgrazes it and overgrazes it. But in the short run, it works really well because they can put more cows on the land and simply overuse it. But what happens in 10 years when the farmer realizes that the field he left 10 years ago thinking he would come back has not recovered in the slightest. So takes years upon decades, and sometimes, and especially the states that don't have as much water, it can take 2 to maybe 3 decades to actually get a field, to get a grazing pasture back to where it used to be. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Joe.
Back to me, and it is my turn to play broken record again. Like I've been talking all semester. These guys told you like what the natural resources that get wasted with the input is. I'm gonna do the same thing I've been doing all semester, which is talking to you about how your individual role can change that, and how our own waste as consumers, if we can stop that, we can stop the waste of these natural resources that they discuss. And the main point I'm gonna get to is culling. Culling is essentially the selection by desired characteristics. So in regards to food and produce, this would be like choosing not to eat an apple with a bruise on it, and more specifically deciding to throw away an apple with a bruise on it. According to a 2012 study by the NRDC, nearly 6%, which amounts to 6 billion pounds or 97,000 acres of land, of fruits and vegetables goes unharvested or unsold every year because it's culled before it even reaches the market. So this stuff isn't wasted by the consumers. This is stuff that never even has a chance to be sold. It is immediately grown and is immediately thrown away. Just because it will not live up to standards from retailers, and retailers make those standards based on what consumers buy. So it's our role to, re-examine this food and understand what it looks like. Just for another statistic here, to tie it back into water, according to a study in 2013 done by Dana Gunders, Monterey County, California is responsible for 40% of the broccoli that's grown in the United States. If Monterey County just was to not harvest 5% of that, which falls under that 6% number, that results in a 1.6 billion gallon loss of water. So just in one county with one food product, they're losing over 1.5 billion gallons of water because this stuff has been chosen not to be harvested, not to be sold, or not to be purchased. And all I'm trying to do here, just like I've done in my previous speeches and that I've convinced these guys to do here, is that we just need to, as consumers, re-examine what our food looks like. It's okay to have food that might look a little different than what you're used to. I urge you to explore these things and realize that ugly food, as it's termed, it has all the same nutrients and all the same health benefits as its better looking counterpart. So just to kind of summarize here a little bit, agricultural waste and food waste is so much more than just the food and money that goes into it. It's the land, it's the water. Specifically with the land, it's the topsoil loss, it's the overgrazing, and with the water, it's that difference between groundwater and surface water. So I'm glad you guys listened. I'm gonna let these guys sum it up a little bit more.
Now there's small things that you can do to simply help prevent agricultural waste, and that is not throwing away food that maybe doesn't look as well as it used to, like a banana that maybe isn't quite the right color that you want. Maybe it's too green, maybe it's too brown, whatever it is. That's a very simple way to stop. But a larger scale is simply taking a more proactive approach to learning about what goes on in agriculture and the waste that goes on within it.
Exactly as Jenny's saying. Maybe next time you go to the store and you see something cool and you're like, I'd like to try that. Maybe buy a small amount, maybe don't buy like the giant, gallon size thing. You can all help fight the problem. So thank you.
Thank you.